Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
It's getting closer by the day, the end of the pandemic. But as we approach that blessed time when we can truly say that COVID-19 is in the rearview mirror, still visible but ever more distant, it's time to consider what this nation will look like, where it will ultimately land after the pandemic has completed its path of destruction, how our society and our people have been changed by this plague upon the land for which we were all unprepared. Which of the often wrenching changes in politics, law, business, culture, media, and ultimately liberty will stay with us, and which will not? Welcome back into Liberty Nation Radio, a production of LibertyNation.com, and heard from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. America After COVID, a discussion whose time has come, and we have brought in the big guns for comprehensive analysis in our B&B panel, the best and brightest, the triumvirate atop LibertyNation.com. Editor-in-Chief, Lisa K. Donner.
Hi, Tim.
Managing Editor, Mark Angelides. And Legal Affairs Editor and host of the Uprising podcast, Scott Cosenza.
Cheers.
Welcome all, and let's start with the radical change in the political direction of the country during the pandemic. Mark, as 2019 turned to 2020, the country was firing on all cylinders. Then came the pandemic, and everything fell apart. Just how significant a factor was the pandemic in the downfall of Donald Trump?
Well, Tim, without going too much off the rails and into speculation, I'd say that if it were not for the media coverage and the attacks against President Trump for his handling of the COVID situation and the COVID situation itself, we wouldn't have a President Joe Biden right now. You have to remember that Trump, he was looking at the evidence that COVID came from a lab leak, and he was roundly dismissed, he was derided and abused by the Fourth Estate. Even having his social media platforms, they were censored, which certainly cut off his ability to talk to the public at a key time. But now that very same evidence that Donald Trump was looking at, whether it turns out to be credible or not, is now the same evidence that Joe Biden has asked for in a 90-day report. It's open season on this admittedly yet unproven theory. So I think that there wouldn't be a President Biden, there would still be a President Trump if the media handling of the COVID pandemic, not necessarily the pandemic itself, had been a little more balanced.
Lisa, the pandemic, the death of George Floyd, and the riots that followed will forever be linked together in the 2020 summer from hell. To what extent do you think the pandemic and the violence built upon each other?
Well, you know, it's been said often that the smile is an international language of, you know, pleasantness and joy and peace and happiness. And, you know, we masked every smile in America. We were cooped up. People were miserable. You know, our sons work in the service industry. The stories they would come home with, people fighting over toilet paper. You know, I had a man in a parking lot. I was waiting for my son to come out of work and pick him up, and the man knocked on my window and practically, I thought he was going to hit me because he said I was blocking something that I wasn't even blocking. Look, misery turns to anger. Anger turns to violence. And I think there is some connection there, without a doubt.
You have to add to the fact, too, that people are kicked out of their schools and workplaces. They got nowhere to go. And that seems to be the de rigueur sexy thing to do. That's sort of the cultural moment to have.
You really can see what a violent year this has been. And I'm sure when we look back on this period, we'll look at the deaths from despair, the suicides, the increase in violence all over the country, all over the world. In fact, it's happened here in the UK too. And people will say, well, was it to do with the racial reckoning that has been so touted in the media, or was it to do with the fact that we were all shut away from, as Lisa points out, the smiles or the physical contact, the human touch that it is so necessary to us as a species. I think that will be the big legacy of COVID.
Okay, Scott, we've always talked about how leftists will use any crisis as an excuse to expand government power and justify the reduction of individual liberty. What do you consider the most egregious examples of liberty stolen during or since the pandemic?
I think there's three, Tim. I think the first one has to be, and this is just not talked about very much, but is the treatment of jailed people in America. These are not people in prisons who have been convicted of felony crimes, but people in jails who are accused of crimes and being held before trial. Many of those people died. So that's number one. Number two, and this is another sort of left field one I'm going to guess, is the debasement of the currency. By printing so much money, it's such a, to steal someone's money is an attack on their liberty. And so many Americans, especially the least of us, don't have IRAs or gold or securities or real estate investment, but they have a small cash investment. And when you debase the value of that currency by just printing money like you're a drunken sailor with the keys to the printing press, you destroy the people's liberty in that regard. And then the third one is the obvious choice, which is the mandated closures of the schools and businesses that made people paupers and deficient in so much. Mark mentioned earlier suicides. These sorts of results that come from this, it's going to be a decade or three before the full measure of these government actions kind of can be calculated with the mess they've made of people's lives.
The education aspect of that as well. It's a concern, but one that we've noticed that people are trying to solve now by the increase in homeschooling that we've seen over the period of the pandemic, which in my opinion is a fantastic thing. Homeschooling is it's the future. It was the past. It's not quite the present, but it is the future.
I'll only say that's because you haven't done it. Just kidding.
I'll second that emotion.
I used to be a teacher. I know what schools are like.
It's another one of those things. It's another one of those things where you hate the process, but you love the result.
Yeah.
For people who can manage it, the problem is that the people that the teachers' unions build up as their key constituency are the people that are least able to manage their resources in a way to shift things around. That's sort of the thing I think that's so perverse about what we're getting from the big box media on this. Those inner city kids that don't have good computer networks and don't have good internet connections and don't have parents at home that can teach them, they're the ones that are just ruined by this policy.
Absolutely.
Who are we? We are Americans that believe in liberty. We are a project of the nonprofit One Generation Away. We are patriots who apply the founding principles to the issues of today.
And they keep moving the goalposts on us.
We are educators and commentators who love America and the Constitution. Who are we? We are Liberty Nation.